Hi there. In this video I will demonstrate the process for moving resources between nodes in a Windows NT cluster. Enjoy. So before we get into it, I'll give you a brief overview of the cluster per se. So as you can see in Server Manager, my domain is called Archaic, and it is composed of the following: core, server name core, which is the primary domain controller, and then we've got the cluster nodes, which is node 1 and node 2, and then the cluster itself is the one called it's an NT4 cluster. Launch the cluster administrator and then browse through the resources within the tree that make up the cluster instance. As you can see in the overview, the cluster is currently on node 2, but to demonstrate I can move the resources, I'm going to move them from node 2 to node 1. And then after I move them to that node, I then do a series of checks to confirm it's no longer on node 2, and then I move them back again from node 1 to node 2, and then do a number of checks to confirm the resources are again accessible. So right now the first resource I am moving is the cluster group. So that has been moved from node 2 to node 1. And here I'm checking the drives W and the cluster instance via network neighborhood and the Q drive to show that the cluster drives are still accessible on node 2 and that the cluster instance is still accessible after moving the cluster group resource. So the first disk resource I move is the Q disk, the Quorum disk. Since it's a very small disk with only just kilobytes of data, it moves quickly. And then proceed to move the second disk, which has the W disk, which has more resources and data stored on there, and it also has two shares, which is media and package. So I see it goes on instantly, and I go to check the drives in the Explorer, and upon checking them I can see the share hand has gone, and when I try to access the disks they are inaccessible. And when I browse to the cluster instance, I can see the shares on the W drive are accessible, media and package. And then I proceed to double check that those resources are on there, because for some reason, even though the cluster is online, they didn't appear at first when on node 2. So moving those resources seems to have spun it back to life. So now I wanted to fail the resources over to the other node, but because this is the 84 cluster, couldn't remember how to do it. So I instead tried to initiate failure, but that didn't do anything. Again, couldn't remember why. So I just decided to move the resources from node 1 back to node 2. And also, to show I am node 2, I launch command prompt and run the hostname command. Okay, so at this point I proceed to move the cluster instance from node 1 back to node 2. As you can see, the instance changed from online to online pending. That succeeds, and then I proceed to do the same thing for the quorum disk within the disk group 1 resource. To verify it worked, refresh the Explorer, and as you can see, I can now browse the quorum disk under node 2. So I double check the properties of the shared resources, well, shares that are in the disk group 2 resource, and then I proceed to move those from node 1 back to node 2. Do a quick refresh, but as you can see, it takes longer because on that disk there's quite a bit of data stored on there, mainly just software packages. As you can see, Explorer finishes refreshing and the resource goes online in Cluster Administrator. And the Adobe Drive has the handback. And I can now browse the disk and the folders that host the shares. And as you can see on the node 2, in the active groups and active resources, the items are listed there. And that concludes the video showing the movement of resources between nodes in the 84 cluster. Thank you for watching.